According to the philosopher Theophrastus, Anaximander of Miletus was the student of Thales. Like most students, Anaximander agreed with his teacher on some points, but disagreed on others. Recall that Thales was interested in the physical world, and said that everything was fundamentally made of water. Anaximander had his own ideas, but only a single fragment of his writing has survived. Nevertheless, ancient figures wrote about him a lot. He was so influential, it's impossible to cover everything he said in this video, but here is a 3-point summary, with the most important ones saved for last. First, Anaximander changed the way that people looked at the world forever. He argued that celestial bodies move around the Earth in full circles. That seems really obvious to us, but it wasn't so obvious in Anaximander's time. The sun goes down and the moon comes up every day, but we don't really see where they go. From our limited perspectives, they just disappear and reappear later on. Nevertheless, Anaximander asserted quite emphatically that things moved in circles around the Earth and therefore passed underneath it. This is a really significant thought because it leads to another idea, that the Earth isn't resting on anything. There's nothing underneath it, holding it up. If it were otherwise, planets and the sun and the moon couldn't circle around us. Anaximander also taught that heavenly bodies were spaced out at different distances. This is another idea that wasn't so obvious in the ancient world. We know from Homer that before Anaximander, people tended to think that the sky was a fixed surface above the Earth. And maybe he noticed that planets sometimes pass in front of stars, or even in front of each other, so he tried to work out the order of the planets and didn't quite get it right. Nevertheless, he did recognize such a thing as orbits. This basically means that Anaximander invented the idea of space itself. Secondly, Anaximander had a very strange idea about human beings. Recall that Thales taught that everything is fundamentally made of water. Anaximander took this idea and used it to explain the origin of people. The Roman writer Censorinus summarizes this view. Anaximander considered that from warmed-up water and earth emerged either fish or entirely fish-like animals. Inside these animals, men took form, and embryos were held prisoners until puberty. Only then, after these animals burst open, could men and women come out, now able to feed themselves. If this idea sounds familiar, you are not the only one who thinks so. Arguably, Anaximander developed a proto-evolutionary idea of human anthropology around 500 BC. Like his teacher Thales, Anaximander clearly thought that water could explain how some things come to be. But that brings us to the third and most important point. Recall that Thales wanted to find the arche, or unifying principle of diversity, and thought that water was the answer. Even though Anaximander agreed that water could explain some things, he was not fully satisfied with his teacher's idea of the arche. Here's what bothered him. Water, like all normal elements, contains properties that oppose the properties in other elements. For instance, water is wet and cold, fire is dry and hot, and earth isn't like either of them. It's hard and fixed. How can all these contradictory things come from the same thing? Later thinkers like Aristotle had different ways of putting Anaximander's view, but we can summarize it like this. Whatever explains all the different things can't also be one of those things. This might seem like a challenge to the whole idea of an arche. If you think about it, how can opposite things even be explained by a single thing? But Anaximander had an answer to that. He called it apeiron, a word that is sometimes translated as the boundless or the infinite. Unlike Thales' arche, the apeiron is a kind of unidentified substance which precedes absolutely everything. It explains air, earth, fire, and water because in a way, it's all of those things at once. The opposites are contained within it, and as it moves, it separates out into simple substances. And substances aren't the only things that come from the apeiron. According to Simplicius, the earth and heavens themselves come from it as well. This makes Anaximander a pretty different thinker from Thales. Thales seems to have been interested in explaining how normal things work, and he was trying to find the arche inside of them. But since Anaximander didn't even think that was possible, he went outside of ordinary experience and proposed something fundamentally strange and unobservable to explain it. This is a very significant step in philosophy. All of the Pre-Socratics were very interested in what we call the physical world, but by stepping outside of the physical world, Anaximander arguably became the first metaphysicist. Metaphysics is the speculative study of that which exists beyond physical reality. Because the apeiron is a kind of infinity, later thinkers like Zeno and Anaxagoras would give it a kind of implicit mathematical nature, but it has also been seen as a precursor to ancient ideas about God, the unmoved mover of all things. Some thinkers didn't like how vague and difficult the apeiron was to define, and Anaximander's own student challenged the need for it. Nevertheless, Anaximander remains a touchstone for the way that ancient philosophy combined the pursuit of science with the pursuit of ultimate reality. To hear about the rest of the Pre-Socratics, and for more videos on famous philosophers, like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. Thales didn't think the arche was invisible or intangible, but just assumed it was something material that could be touched and seen. Of all the elements, Thales identified water.